Hi everyone, I'm Diana.
And I'm Nick.
And it is Wednesday. That means it's Team RCIA Day, where it's every day is Team RCIA Day.
So we want to ask, should we require seekers to pray during our catechetical sessions? Mm-hmm. That's a question we got recently, and we were frankly a little astounded by it. But then as we thought about it more, we thought maybe a lot of people are wondering that.
Yeah, and I think the obvious answer is yes, of course. But sometimes we approach prayer as sort of just the opening part of our sessions. Of course, we got to start with prayer, but it's really, if we think about it, prayer is really the core of our sessions. It's the teaching, because without that core discipline of prayer, we can't hear God's voice. We might just be hearing our own voice, right?
And if you think about what the journey of faith is, that's what the opening line in the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults says. We're calling adults to enter onto the journey of faith. Mm-hmm. If you think about what that is, it's a metaphor, right? There's no actual roadmap that Google Maps will plot for you. That's the journey of faith. It's a metaphor, but it's a metaphor for our relationship with God and with God's people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the only way to really enter into that relationship in a deep and powerful way is through prayer.
Yes. And our colleague, John Michael Reyes, helped us answer this question, and he shared a quote from Pope Francis, from one of Pope Francis's homilies. Oh gosh, way back at the beginning of his pontificate in 2013, 10 years ago, right? 2013, Pope Francis said, "The Lord tells us the first task in life is this, prayer, but not the prayer of words like a parrot, but the prayer, the heart, gazing on the Lord, hearing the Lord, asking the Lord." And so that foundation of prayer really is the roadmap for that journey. It's the first step, and it's the guiding principle for that journey.
Now, I remember when I was a little kid, my mom taught me prayers that I memorized. So that sense of praying like a parrot, it was a little bit like that as a child, because that's what Mom told me to do, and I did. But as you know, I grew up in a Catholic household and a Catholic school and a Catholic community, and as I parroted those words over and over, something changes in your heart over time, especially if you really think about what you're praying. And then as I got older, I began to experience prayer that was more of a conversation, more of a listening to God, more of a just sitting and being in God's presence.
Yeah, it's that gazing on the Lord that Pope Francis talks about. And that it's sitting in God's presence. A lot of times when we think of prayer, we think of words. What words are we going to say?
Especially if we're talking about teaching the seekers to pray. We might start like my mother taught me, with some memorized words that they're going to say. But you were going to say that's not really...
Yeah, prayer, the first act of prayer, the essential act of prayer is listening.
Yeah.
Right? It's that not quietness. You don't need quiet in order to pray, just as you don't need quiet in order to listen. You need focus and attention. It's that contemplation part of prayer that is essential. And sometimes having a quiet space helps us enter into that. But also it's that silencing, the quieting of our minds, the quieting of our bodies, the stillness, which can happen in the midst of chaos, right? So Jesus, I think of Jesus in the boat sleeping while the storm was raging around him. There is quiet and stillness are not just physical realities that are around us. They are the interior attitudes that we need for prayer. So however way we can do that in order to listen and not first speak, that's a core teaching we can hand on to our seekers and catechumens.
And maybe the reason this person sent in the question to us the way she did is because it's a little counterintuitive. I've got my lesson plan. I've got what I'm going to teach. We got to get through this topic tonight. There are so many points here, and I've only got so much time, and I've got to start talking right away. So it's counterintuitive to say, let's just take some time and listen. What are you going to listen for? I've already got my lesson plan. What am I listening for?
Yeah.
And like Diana said, it's really listening to the gentleness of the Spirit. What is God's Spirit saying to us in this moment? As we're gathered together, as the people of God, as the catechumens, as the sponsors, as the candidates, so all of us are gathered together for this holy moment. Let's just take a moment and listen to what the Spirit is asking of us, irregardless of anything that I have already planned.
And as you were describing that scenario, I'm recognizing and realizing that by making prayer a real substantial foundation to our quote-unquote lesson, it is calling the catechist, the leader, to listen to the catechumens, to listen to the seekers and the candidates, because if God is speaking to us in prayer, we have to hear what each person has heard, right? Because the Spirit is going to communicate to each person according to the needs of each person. And so this is our opportunity as leaders, as catechists, to hear what God has to say through the catechumens. So to invite the catechumens to say out loud, what did God say to you? What did the Spirit reveal to you in prayer? And our first act of teaching is then to listen to our catechumens, to listen to the people whom the Spirit has given to us.
Now, I know from my own disreputable experience that the times that I have been anxious to get going with the topic that I had prepared, and the times that I've been reluctant to listen to God's call, is when my own prayer life has been out of whack, when I haven't been engaged in personal prayer on a regular, daily, consistent basis. And those times have gone up and down in my life. There's times when I've been good at it, times when I've not been good at it, times when in the middle. We all have that. But some time ago, we put together a list of ways, based on our own experience and experience from others that we have encountered, of like best prayer practices that you should use as a leader of the catechumenate. And you can also use some of these to teach your seekers how to pray. But at the core of each of these suggestions, each of these prayer practices, like Diana said, the real fundamental basis of each of them is to first listen. These are all like methods to help us listen better.
Yes.
And Diana's put a link in there that you can click on and just download that 17 best prayer practices for catechumenate leaders.
So maybe we'll just go through a couple, two or three of these, our favorites from these 17 best practices for deepening our own prayer life with our catechumens.
And the number one, really, you could, if you just did this one, all the others would be accomplished kind of de facto. And that is just to set a time, an appointment with yourself every day and keep the appointment. And I remember once I was leading a catechumenate group, and I had this one catechumen, and she was having real trouble with this. I'd say to her, we all commit to pray during the week. I'd say, everybody got their time. You know what time you're going to pray? Yes. And so we come back the next week, and I'd say, how'd everybody do? And people report in. And she would always say, I didn't have time. She never had time. Even though she set the time, she didn't have time. Even if I told her it was 5 minutes or 1 minute, or, she didn't have time. And the way that I got her to set a time was I knew she loved coffee. So I told her, when you get your coffee in the morning, the coffee's all brewed, the pot is there, you reach and you grab the handle of the pot. As you're holding on to the handle of the pot, just pause and say in your heart, God, thank you for coffee. And then pour your coffee. And that she could do. So that was the set time, the set prayer, and that began her prayer life.
And I think for me, if you saw my desk right now, which I'm glad you cannot see right now, it is strewn with stuff. But I mean, it's all the stuff that I use for work, all the papers and books that I'm using here, but also kind of souvenirish kind of things that I've picked up from places here and there, and little notes here and there. And this is kind of a space that I've created for myself. And so another way to deepen our own prayer life is to create a space that gives us visual cues. So like for the catechumen that Nick was working with, the coffee, the action, the ritual of having a set time, but also having a set place that gives you visual cues. And just like prayer, your prayer environment doesn't need to be absolutely silent. Your prayer space doesn't need to be, like a big old altar. You can, I know lots of people who create beautiful, wonderful, holy prayer altars in their home. But it's that focal visual prompt that uh, reminds us either of a person or an event or a situation that we are being called to pray for, and it prompts us to enter into that relationship with God, to pray, to intercede, really to rely on God in that moment. And no words need to be said, but it's that recognition, that remembrance of our reliance upon God that can become an entryway into prayer.
Another tip is to keep a written list of people to pray for. So I know some mornings I'm like, I'm too tired or too busy or too distracted. I don't want to just sit down in my prayer space and take that moment to pray. But then I think about all the people I promised to pray for, and I've got them physically written on a list. I know, that I have to, in a sense, keep my commitment to them, that I told them I'd pray for them. And if I miss a day, it's not like God isn't going to take care of them. But still, I feel responsible somehow. And sometimes that's an encouragement for me to continue my regular prayer practice.
Mm-hmm. And I think I'll do two others here back to back, connect them together. We talked about rote prayer.
Yeah.
So rote prayer is not bad. We start with that because that's how we learn. Just like musicians, you begin with scales. It's nothing amazingly artistic, but it's how we enter into the pattern of prayer. And so use the prayers that we know, the Lord's Prayer, the Hail Mary, the Glory Be, but maybe pray them in a different way. Pray them slowly. Pray them line by line, taking time in between each line to reflect on what you just said and listen to God's voice in those empty spaces. And once we've kind of embodied the patterns of prayer that we encounter in those rote prayers, then we can then begin to use those patterns to create our own prayers. A very traditional pattern of prayer is what many prayer leaders call a you, who, do, through pattern. You, God, so we name God, who has done amazing things. We say out loud or name and recall the blessings that God has given to God's people. Do, the third part, we ask God, do that again. Bless your people again in this very specific way, in this specific scenario or event. And then we end that prayer with through Christ our Lord, because every Christian prayer is always in the name of Christ. So you, God, who has done amazing things, do that again through Christ our Lord. Play around with that pattern based on all of the rote prayers that we have and see what kind of words come up and well up in your own prayer life.
I think the last tip I'd give you is to pray always in thanksgiving. And because even in our darkest days, even when life is overwhelming, even when we're suffering from grief or loss, Pope Francis teaches this, so did Pope John Paul II, that that there's always joy. There's always joy. Not that joy is not the same as happiness necessarily, but there's always that underlying peace, underlying knowledge that God is with us even in our times of trial, even in our moments on the cross with Christ. God is with us, and so we can always be grateful and always pray a prayer of thanksgiving, no matter what our circumstances are.
Mm-hmm. So, as a summary, deepen your own prayer life so that you can help deepen the prayer life of your catechumens and candidates and all your seekers, and treat prayer as the teaching of everything that you try to teach, because it is God who is teaching us through Jesus whenever we intentionally enter and recall that relationship in prayer. Make sure that you go to that website that we put into the comments and get your free download for those 17 best prayer practices that you can do for yourself and with your catechumens and candidates. And it's a handout, so you can share that by email, post it on your website, or print it out old school and give it to those that you are journeying with.
All right, everyone. We hope you're having a blessed Lent. We know you're busy preparing for the Triduum, Holy Week and the Triduum, so get back to work.
And pray. We are praying for you as we hope that you are praying for us. And thank you so much for listening. I'm Diana McAlintel.
I'm Nick Wagner.
And thank you.
Take care.